Thank you for coming. We're releasing the findings on an officer-involved shooting in Calgary from 2016. On October 11th, 2016, ASIRT was directed to investigate the circumstances surrounding the death of a 76-year-old man following an interaction with members of the Calgary Police Service that day. At 11 a.m. on that day, CPS received a 911 call originating from a Calgary home, initially consisting solely of screaming. However, several minutes later, the caller indicated that his grandfather was trying to kill him with a hammer. Calgary Police Service units arrived on scene and found the caller, an adult man, outside the residence, naked and suffering from head trauma. The caller told police that his grandfather had attacked him with a hammer and that he had stabbed his grandfather with a knife in self-defense. Additional officers arrived on scene and fanned out to contain the residence. At the rear of the home, officers noticed blood on a wall and on the floor and heard a loud mechanical noise coming from the detached garage. Officers could see the man covered in blood through the window on the side of the detached garage. Two officers entered the garage, one slightly ahead of the other. Inside, they could see that someone had turned on a table saw and a vehicle was idling with a section of dryer hose running from the exhaust pipe into the window of the vehicle. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds. The man turned towards the officers as they came in, and they could see him holding a large knife in his right hand. Officers shouted repeated commands for the man to drop the knife, but he did not comply. The second officer began to step backwards to create more distance, but tripped and fell to the ground. The first officer, closer to the man, fired a single round from his service pistol, which struck the man in the torso. Following the shot, the man fell to the floor. CPS members administered first aid until EMS could arrive and take over and provide emergency medical care for the man, but he died at the scene. Investigators recovered the man's knife from the floor of the garage where he fell. A search of the man's residence revealed notes, some that could be described as suicide notes, along with a journal detailing the man's mounting frustration with aspects of his life, his health, the continuing conflict in his home, and the deterioration of his relationship with his grandson. Significantly, there was a note that described the man's plan to attack his grandson with a hammer and then kill himself by carbon monoxide poisoning inside the garage. It was evident that the man did not intend to survive the events that occurred that day. Interviews with those who knew the man confirmed his growing frustration and his declining physical and mental health. In the weeks before this incident, the man had been hospitalized for a head injury. One witness described a conversation in which the man repeated his plan to confront his grandson with a hammer and to end his own life. Although concerning, the witness thought this was just talk and an opportunity for the man to vent his frustration and unhappiness to a friend. The deceased had no prior criminal record, and from everybody that ASIRT has talked to within the family and the friends, this incident is completely out of character for what they would have expected from him. An autopsy determined the sole cause of death was a single gunshot wound to the torso. Numerous sharp force injuries consistent with stab wounds were observed but not believed to have contributed to the death. CPS officers were responding to a serious assault involving the use of a weapon. Based on the information that they had available to them, they were lawfully placed to arrest the man. Observing a man covered in blood and suffering from an injury gave officers grounds to enter the detached garage under exigent circumstances. And once they entered, they were confronted by the male holding a large knife. Repeated verbal commands to drop the knife preceded their use of force. Under the criminal code, an officer is entitled to use as much force as is reasonably necessary in the lawful execution of his or her duties. This can include lethal force, provided the officer reasonably believes that such force is necessary to defend themselves or someone else from death or grievous bodily harm. Further, any person, including police officers, are entitled to the use of reasonable force in self-defense. The situation faced by these officers upon entering the garage was capable of giving rise to a reasonable fear of death or grievous bodily harm to one or both of the officers. The man encountered in the garage had been reportedly involved in a violent incident, was armed with a large knife, was non-compliant, and appeared suicidal. When the witness officer tripped and fell while trying to retreat, the alternative courses of action left available to the first officer were substantially reduced and the imminence of the threat increased. The use of force by the subject officer was reasonable when viewing the incident as a whole. The nature of the offense being investigated, the involvement of a weapon in the commission of that offense, the physical possession of another weapon, the non-compliance with verbal commands, and the physical position in relation to the man all gave rise to objective grounds to resort to lethal force. Based on that, I found that the evidence supports the finding that there are no grounds to believe that the officer committed an offense. He was lawfully placed both to enter the garage and to try and effect an arrest. Given the events after the officers entered the garage, the force used was reasonable. As such, no charges will be laid. This was an incredibly sad and devastating event for the family and friends of the man for many reasons. Having met with the family, I am going to ask you, at their request, that they please be allowed to try to put this behind them and respect their privacy. ASIRT continues to extend its condolences to all of those who were affected by this event. That is all I have to say.